All right. Again, I'm going to have a good bit more to say about Hitler later, but for right now, your book turns toward the Soviet Union and Stalin. Stalin took over after the death of Lenin. In fact, it's been said that Lenin knew what kind of man Stalin was and was hoping that somehow Stalin would not get a chance, but Stalin was a shrewd maneuverer, manipulator. Stalin goes down in history as perhaps next to Hitler as being one of the most evil men who ever governed any kind of country. Totally ruthless. He was determined, though more so than the others, to make Russia into the Soviet Union into a socialistic state. And he collectivized the farms. Now, by collectivization, that meant he took 20, your book says, some 26 million family farms. He joined together into 250,000 collective units. In effect, he said to the people around, the peasants, he said, now, you don't own your land anymore. All this land is owned now by all of you collectively. You know, it's not by the state, but the community owns the land. That's what the word community is. The community owns the land. I want all of you to get up each day and go farm it. When you're through, turn your produce over to me, and I will redistribute this produce among all of you as I see fit. Well, here is the problem. A lot of these people turned their produce over to the state and never got fed back, never got anything back. Now, this is interesting, I think. I mean, who knows which part of the Soviet Union starved the worst? I have to point this out to you because it's relevant today. Anybody know? It's in the book on page 731, the top part of the Ukraine. Ukraine. Why is that relevant? It explains why the Ukrainians to this day hate Russia. The Ukrainians were starved en masse. Stalin personally told Churchill that the 10 million Ukrainians had died. We could not tell because at one time the Russians would not allow reporters in, but after the, I say this tongue-in-cheek, folks, after the Cold War ended in 1990, not that it's over with, but supposedly in 1990, the Russians did allow people to come in. We began to count the number of persons who had died, but it was in the millions. Again, it's difficult to count. There were so many, but the number was in the millions of persons who died of starvation, a lot of them Ukrainians. And it wasn't because Ukrainians had been bad farmers. They'd simply turned in their produce to the state, and the state just allowed them to starve. Again, now, in yesterday's class, nobody knew, seemingly, that the Ukrainians had been starved in mass. Hardly anybody in this class seems to know it. If you had grown up in Ukraine, your grandparents should certainly have told you. They have not forgotten it. Fast forward to 2014, and they still remember it to this day. And that part of the world, as I'm hopeful of, is making a lot of news every day right now. What they did back then is relevant now. Stalin also began to industrialize the country, rapid industrialization. He forced the people to work, and the ones who wouldn't, he put in labor camps in Siberia. And many, many persons died in the labor camps. One woman, this is in your book, was told as saying if people were afraid, they'd work better. Stalin had her sent to Siberia, where she died. 8 million Russians, it's believed, were arrested. Millions died in these Siberian forced labor camps. Well, they had a very rapidly declining birth rate. Again, Stalin, like the other dictators, Hitler, Franco, Mussolini, they wanted their women to bear children, but the Russian women simply were not. So he reversed a lot of the permissive, I've talked about this, the permissive social legislation that gave almost complete equality of rights for women. He discouraged abortion. Actually, I think he outlawed abortion and outlawed divorce. And they encouraged women to not work outside their home. Basically, they actually sent women back to their homes and told them to go home and bear children. Yeah, it does say abortion was outlawed. Divorced fathers who failed to, they were what we call deadbeat dads. Divorced fathers who failed to support their children were fined heavily by the state, which gave the fathers incentive to make sure that they support their children. And the result was the declining birth rate was at least somewhat reversed. Now, again, I talked about this a few days ago. Now that they jumped right smack into the cauldron of immorality and jumped right back out. But we are slowly boiling in a similar cauldron. All right, I'll stop here. I mean, I've done a lot of time. If anybody wants to comment, I mean, I promise I won't argue. Your comments are welcome. In the long struggle, folk, between civilized and uncivilized, who knows which side has usually won? Civilized and uncivilized. Usually, the uncivilized win. Now, one example is in the case of the Europeans coming over with the American Indians. I'll have to say I consider the American Indians uncivilized and the Europeans as civilized. But I mean, pick the winners between European and American Indian. The Europeans had better technology, but also European women were averaging about 8 babies per woman. 10, 12, and 14 children was somewhat the norm. And American Indian women are only averaging 1 to 2 babies per woman. Again, pick the winners. It wasn't just that the Indians didn't have the guns and the horses. Hey, by the time of King Philip's War in 1680, the Indians had guns and knew how to use them. The Indians had horses and became excellent horsemen. But the Indians were hopelessly outnumbered. But look at the Romans. They were a civilization surrounded by Germanic, barbarian people. The barbarians won. Yes?
Wasn't that mostly because Rome at that point was highly decentralized, and the barbarians that they were called Romans, but they didn't hold Roman.
They let the barbarians in. Okay, I'm glad you mentioned that. Here's what they did. They let the foreigners in. And then they wound up their army consisted mostly of foreign, because you're not fine. Basically, it would be like if we decided, oh, we don't have a big enough army, so let's hire Cubans, let's hire Mexicans, let's hire Canadians, let's hire French, anyone we can find to put in an army. But it's something else that happened to Rome, and this is the one thing improvement. This is something that your authors state, and if you take first semester world history, there's a lot of theories about why Rome fell, but the one thing you can prove is they experienced a population decline. Why did your population decline? And folk, it was not war. They had 200 years of no war. It was not war, it was not pestilence, that came later. Then what made your population decline? Famine? It wasn't famine. They had none of that at the time. It was simply, and folk, I mean, this might be offensive to some of you, they voluntarily decided not to have children. You had a high percentage of the population who were unmarried. I'm talking about Rome now. And there was a very big increase in the number of bachelors and a very big increase in the number of unmarried women. And the married women would not have babies. They practiced abortion, infanticide, and birth control of all types. They had those techniques even back then. And the result was the barbarian women were having all the babies, and this is what the barbarians came in and wanted. This happened to the Sumerians, the Akkadians, the Greeks, I mean practically every civilization. And Stalin and Hitler and Mussolini were aware of this. Especially Stalin, because Lenin had given the women and men licentiousness, complete licentiousness, no restraints, because again, the idea that you should not commit adultery, that's in that book that we don't want to have anything to do with. I'm speaking as a Russian now. So we want to prove to the world that you can commit all the adultery you want, engage in sexual license and everything and be okay. They tried it. The women became nervous wrecks, psychotic, neurotic, and the few babies they had did not know who their fathers were. They grew up becoming incorrigible. And after a while, even Stalin had to say, what?
Sounds like America right now.
But the difference is, Stalin was able to move in and put a stop to it. Now, on a somewhat personal note, when I was taking my final exam for a master's degree, which I passed, but there was 2 men and a woman on my committee, and this one, there's a new barbaric theory, and I'm talking, this was in May, well, pardon me, it was in July 1975. There's a new barbaric theory that's just come out that the reason the Roman Empire fell was their women pursued careers instead of having babies. And this is a new barbaric theory. As soon as I got home, I felt like I could have said, but I didn't do it. It was barbaric, all right. It was the barbaric women who had all the babies. And guess what? It was the barbaric men who came in and took over and plunged Europe into the Dark Age for a time. All right. Again, if you don't like what I'm saying, you're welcome. I'm not going to argue the point. You're welcome to speak up. One of you is looking at me with a look of sheer hate. Oh, man. What's he talking about? Again, if it sounds like America right now, folks, if our country falls, we're going to fall in. Half of the adult population of the United States is unmarried. Yes?
What about like overpopulation and famine?
Okay, I'm really glad you brought that up. The overpopulation thing is a sheer scam. It's sheer bunk. It's sheer total nonsense. What we have, I mean, the population, there was a man named, oh, we talked about him, as long ago as 1680, Malthus. Malthus, we talked about him. Malthus said that we were going to populate fast, we could feed a population. Well, what happened? Tractors were invented, reapers were invented, combines, better fertilizers, we found more fertile land. The idea behind population is that each person should contribute more than he consumes. Therefore, what we need is more people. Now, if I could go back to the year 1300 and say, hey, these people are capable of making roads, automobiles, airplanes, but what do they need first of all? What do they need? People, and lots and lots and lots and lots of them. And one person will invent the steam engine, another person invent the gasoline engine, another person invent the combine and the reaper, the tractor, the plow. And after a while, we get to where 95% of us are no longer farming because we don't have to. And what about food? The problem that most of us are having with food is not that we're not getting enough. The problem that we're having with food is we're getting too much. You can look at me, I'm a farmer, and say, all right, go ahead. If you want to argue, go ahead.
But like, I mean, we're doomed to once, women and adults, go after a career, they have less children. Usually
that's what Hitler said,
more
what Mussolini
populations come
said.
into other countries where there's job opportunities and populate those countries with different ethnic backgrounds. And I mean, isn't that the solution to it instead of, because usually we're doomed just to follow a career and have less children.
Okay, repeat again. Somewhere I got lost.
Okay, well, everybody, like when women go to college and
Right.
are educated, the statistics prove that they're going to have they're less likely to have children than educated women. But usually that is supplemented by immigration and other people coming into the.
In the United States, yes. Immigration, because the United States attracts foreigners, immigrants, and I say that with all due respect. But if certain countries, like in the land of Japan, they don't allow, and guess what? They're dying. You Japanese, if I'm wrong, my apologies, but they're dying. They don't, but also in European countries, they're taking in certain foreigners who they do not like and are now trying to get rid of because they don't have enough workers to do the work that needs to be done. So they bring in these foreigners. I hate to tell you where they're from, but anyway, they bring in a lot of foreigners who do have a lot of children, and they sit there and they don't take any part in European culture. They don't assimilate. They don't become part of the culture, and they make all kinds of problems. And then the Europeans are now trying to get rid of them. And a lot of it is because no Western country is having, and this is something your book's going to mention later, no West is having enough babies to keep the population level. The population of Western countries is going down, and that includes, Japan is not a Western, but that includes especially Japan. Germany is losing more people to birth control than it did to the war. And as for abortion, in our country, we've lost about 1 million persons to war during all of our wars. We've had at least 40 million babies aborted since 1973. And that is the reason, folk, why you younger folk may not enjoy Social Security. The older people are taken care of by the younger generation. Thus it has always been. Thus it always will be. When the younger people are no longer being born, the whole society perishes together, young and old alike. And eventually they get taken over by foreigners who did have all the babies. All right, I did not intend to get this far, but then again, your book mentions this. Hitler and Mussolini, as evil as they were, and Stalin, as thoroughly evil as they were, they gave the ideas that I've given a bad name. Talk about how that evil Mussolini sent women home from their workplace, told them to go home and have children. Evil though the man was, he made his views, everything about his views become evil. We may realize someday that these men had at least one thing about them where they might have been right. They might have been right. Again, humanity is a mixture of good and evil. There's bad in all of us, there's good in all of us. And the mixture sometimes gets so that it mixed that we sometimes get to think that, well, all right, look at him, he does this, therefore his view on this might be wrong. Or he did that, therefore his view on that might be wrong. Just because he may have killed millions of people doesn't mean his views on everything is wrong. But Stalin, again, was in a position to realize that, hey, I can't have a society like the one Lenin was about to create. So he reversed Lenin's laws. Also, keep in mind, Russia had lost a lot of people in the wars. And after the wars were over, they wound up paying women to have children. Have you ever heard this? Some European countries have done this. But they wound up paying women, married or unmarried. If you have a baby, we'll pay for the baby. Just have your babies because we need them. Otherwise, we have no future. They had so many of their men killed in the battlefield, both world wars, that they simply had a ratio of women, 3 women to every 2 men, which meant that there weren't enough husbands to go around for all the women. So some of the women apparently doubled up. Okay. All right. Anybody else have any further? Now,